This case does this. It's part of the more modern lineup of cases that invert pretty quickly, as you can see here. And we'll just flip that back around. Now with the feet in. And that's it. So these two cases are based on the same chassis. They're the Montech HS01 and HS02 Pro cases. The cases are differentiated by glass or mesh on the front, and they each include 5 fans. Major points of interest include the recessed motherboard tray, ventilated rear chamber cover, and abnormal power supply location up front. It's not all good news though. The power supply area specifically has some ventilation problems we're not happy about. But there are some mechanical upsides. The rear fans remove as a single piece without becoming a proprietary nightmare, which is a welcomed feature. The case tries to plan around back connect motherboards, running into the chicken or egg problem that both boards and cases are facing. And like always, we have some critiques for these cases, but there's also things we like about them. And the cases are priced at $130 to $140 for the versions with fans, which is these, or $100 to $110 without fans. Before that, this video is brought to you by Arctic and the Liquid Freezer 3, which we've tested using our standard methodology and found to be one of the most noise-efficient CPU coolers on our charts. The Liquid Freezer 3 includes rise and offset mounting to improve AMD performance and uses a thicker radiator to further lower the temperatures. Arctic has priced these competitively for AIOs, and you can learn more at the link in the description below. Montech is probably most famous for its Kin 95 cases. The company, like most of them, has had its hits and misses over the last several years, but we're starting to review more of their cases now, so it seems like they're at least on the trajectory of generally more hits than misses. Montech has been making some waves mostly in the budget category, and the budget category is one that right now, it's going to be a bloodbath for some of these case manufacturers facing potential tariffs issues. And yes, those are still in place. It's just different percentages. The exemptions didn't get rid of all case tariffs. So with that reality, whatever you think of it, only the most aggressive of companies pursuing market share the hardest with the most room in the margins are going to be the ones that can maintain their prices. Montech emailed us just before these review embargoes lifted, and after seeing our tariffs video, to let us know that they plan to stick to the pricing they quoted at, which was $130 to $140 for these two, or $100 to $110 for the others. Now the big marketing play is towards inversion, which we showed at the beginning. Cases have inverted in the past, but some of the original invertible cases we covered were difficult to flip around and required dozens of screws. Modern invertible cases like this one, or the Be Quiet Light Base series, have made this process way faster. And actually the way the feet mount on this case, they've done it really well. So they have these captive screws that have like a spring mechanism to them, plus magnets, plus these plastic snaps that socket into place. So it can actually be very secure without screwing it in. We 100% recommend screwing it in. But they're very easy to move around and they're relatively resilient, which is nice to see because that hasn't always been the case, like with the Be Quiet Light Base feet solution, which was excellently done mechanically, but a little bit frail. Inversion's pretty easy. The top cover moves to the bottom filter and the legs move to the top, and that's it. The process is optionally toolless, and the main downside of making the process so simple is that aspects of the case that are designed to work right side up aren't altered at all in the inversion process. So the side panels and the rear fan bracket are installed upside down when the case is inverted, and the power supply switch becomes inaccessible. Other aspects of case configuration are easy to deal with. The top panel is magnetic and pulls off easily. They use a rubber, wannabe leather looking colored strap at the back, and then the rear 2-fan bracket comes off as a single unit, which we liked, and the rear expansion slots rotate vertically with minimal effort. Removing the top panel gives immediate access to the power supply switches, like power and eco mode, as well as the RGB hub connections in Pro variants. The HS02 has what Montech calls an 8-degree curved glass front pane. That's a direct quote from them, 8 degrees curved glass. It is not curved at 8 degrees, it's 90. So maybe they meant the radius of the bend was 8 millimeters or something. The media kit came complete with an illustration of the corner with an 8-degree label though, so we're not really sure. But either way, the bend is, in fact, 90 degrees in total. And the front panel butts up against the side panel to look sort of like a continuous pane. This is similar in styling to some parts of the Kin 95. It's not as impressive as the Haven HS420, but it's also way less expensive. The glass panels are beveled where they meet the angled plastic pillars for a flush fit, and the chassis design strikes us overall as being intended for back connect boards, which puts it in a weird spot because, again, it's that chicken or egg problem where designing around back connect boards to the extent that some standard motherboard features are restricted or difficult to work with, that can cause issues because the vast majority of sales are still going to be normal motherboards. But at the same time, if nobody builds for back connect, it'll never go anywhere. Not that it needs to go anywhere, but if it does, it'd probably make more money for the motherboard makers and the case makers, so it probably will. The motherboard and fans have what Montech describes as a sink-in design, meaning that ATX or even MATX boards are surrounded by metal on all sides. As a consequence, it's difficult to reach board connectors with normal motherboards, which is most of them. For example, we were forced to use the stock flat EPS 12-volt cables for our Silverstone power supply because our custom sleeved cable mod replacements couldn't cleanly fit. Routing the 24-pin cable required an uncomfortable bend, and fitting the USB headers into place was nearly impossible in some spots. There's no good route for the GPU power cable either, although that's a common issue with open-bottomed cases and not specific to Montech. The power supply area specifically leaves a lot to be desired because it ends up stacking mesh on mesh on mesh. So this is the outer case panel. It's got ventilation holes in it. We might call it mesh or something like that. And then this is an inner cable cover panel, also ventilated. Under that, which we've had to screw it down because it doesn't fit flush with our power supply in there, there's more mesh, and that's from the power supply. So they've got 3 stacked layers, which unfortunately means that there's increased resistance to flow, and there's going to be reduced flow in general. The potential downsides of this are that it could create noise, and that's going to be highly dependent on the fan and the power supply you buy. And it can also just reduce cooling performance. Now, fortunately for Montech here, power supplies are extremely resilient, broadly speaking, and they tend to work at pretty high operating temperatures. In most of the certifications, they've tested at like 50 degrees Celsius ambient. So probably it's going to be fine in nearly every use case. But it is suboptimal. And if there's any channel out there that complains when something is slightly suboptimal, it's going to be us. So we'd like to see something with fewer overlapping obstructions there. With the power supply fastened down, we found our Silverstone power supply pushed the cover up without screws to hold it in place, so we added them. The power supply mounting bracket can be rotated to mount either a standard ATX or a smaller SFX power supply. This bracket then slides into place and is screwed to the top of the chassis. There's no particular reason to use an SFX PSU with this case. The extension cable that runs from the rear of the case to the bracket at the front has to be routed through the bracket before it's installed. Now this is mostly an air cooling case, which is how we're testing it. Radiator support is restricted though. The front of the HS02 obviously doesn't support radiators because there aren't any mounts. But even in the HS01, the power supply placement overlaps with the front fan mount. That means there's only space for mounting on the outside of the chassis, and only normal 25mm thick fans fit. No radiators, no extra thick fans. At the top of the case, Montech claims support for radiators up to 123mm wide, which is a strict limit due to the bumps on the ATX power supply bracket that poke through, leaving small bumps to interfere with clearance. The bottom mount works fine for radiators other than obstructing the bottom edge of ATX boards, but Montech, correctly, doesn't claim compatibility above 240mm due to the cramped space. At least they're not stretching the claims though. It's kind of sad we do have to praise that at this point, however. There's no 140mm wide radiator compatibility in either case, and only the HS01 has support for any 140mm fans. Generally speaking, in this particular case, we don't like all the brackets and metals and covers that they've crammed into the back of this case. Some of them hide cable clutter, sometimes at the cost of thermals, but most of that clutter would be invisible anyway behind the steel panel. There are times that we like this type of feature, but in this case, there are already trade-offs in the depth and the accessibility for some connectors in some areas. So sacrificing more of that for the metal plates can sometimes work against it. Even still, cable management space is generous, but we'd happily trade some of that space for better access to normal motherboard connectors and some small clearance in the main chamber. Moving on to the hardware that's included, cases generally include SSD screws for 2.5-inch SSDs, but this one doesn't. As the manual notes, every screw included in the accessory kit is number 632 TPI. The cases claim compatibility with up to 4 2.5-inch drives. So the screws are a strange omission. It's not a big deal to bring your own screws, but not standard for a case to cut this corner. At the same time, maybe this is the start of the end for supporting 2.5-inch drives or something. Most stuff is going towards the sticks that you put in NVMe slots, and we were around for, this is going way back, we were around for when the 5 1/4 inch drives were eliminated from cases, and that was a big risk. Now, they support 2.5 inch, so it's there. It's just, it's weird to not have the screws for it. Every other case we've reviewed anytime in the last decade has had them. The front panels of the HS01 and HS02 aren't directly interchangeable because there are some differences to the support structure. Like, for example, the support pillar in the corner of the HS01. This pillar right here, not present on that one. And likewise, some plastic trim that's on the HS02 that's not in the HS01. So you can't just flip them. This isn't really a problem unless you wanted to change it out or something at a later point, in which case right now it's not like you can buy the panel separately, so you'd be buying a whole new case for that. But it's really not standard for cases to allow just interchanging panels. Some of them can do it, and will ship with extra panels as a result, including the Kin 95 Pro actually. This one doesn't though. The reason we're mentioning it is because of Montech's history with the Kin 95 Pro. All variants include ARGB lighting strips at the bottom of the cases, with the Pro cases, which are the ones we're working with, also including ARGB fans and a built-in controller. The fans use separate standard connections for ARGB and fan control, which we generally prefer, but it does lead to a confusing mess of wires for people who might be less experienced with it. If you've bought into one of the proprietary RGB ecosystems, the Pro cases really aren't the best for working with that. Now we're getting to the thermal testing. So the Pro variants include fans, 5 of them, and the non-Pro variants do not. We're testing the Pro variants. We are also testing with them inverted. Now, some of Montech's marketing materials claim that they're going for a sort of chimney effect of cooling, so bottom to top, which means that, in theory, you flip it and that gets reworked around. Now, we've kind of always said this on the channel, but although, yes, heat rises, pushing air through like a 2,000 RPM fan does a whole hell of a lot more than heat naturally rising. So you could pretty much overcome just about any natural air movement that you get from heat in a computer case, as long as there's fans in the right places. But we're going to test on both orientations just to see what it does, if anything. Broadly speaking, the difference between heat rising versus, for example, giving way more open access to the fans when they're up at the top rather than against the surface at the bottom, that part's going to matter more. In addition to that, some of our B-roll might only show 4 fans in the black case here, and we did have 5, and we did test with 5 when we used it. But Wendell came through and he stole one. So it's in his server in a different state. But we did test with it. We hadn't filmed yet. So thanks, Wendell.
Thanks, Steve.
Let's get into the thermals. We'll start with noise normalized CPU thermals, which means we'll use our hemianechoic chamber in the lab to collect highly controlled noise data for comparison. Inverting the case didn't produce a significant change. The HS01 Pro ran at about the same temperature in both tests. The glass panel versus the mesh panel also had minimal impact here. The stock fan layout is the same in both cases, meaning that the HS01's mesh front won't do much unless the fans are rearranged. If anything, it could allow some air to escape where we'd rather keep it in. The CPU averaged 49 degrees Celsius above ambient in the HS01 Pro, 52 degrees on the P cores, and the results for the inverted HS01 and for the HS02 were within the normal range of variance. The fans were run at slightly different speeds in each of the 3 configurations to hit 27 dBA for the threshold, which is where the chamber comes into play, as we can actually measure those tiny acoustic differences now. But that wasn't enough to make a difference thermally. Montech's own moderately more expensive Kin 95 Pro with a glass front beat the HS cases in this test with an average of 47 degrees above ambient. The Antec C8 ARGB is also more expensive, but it has relatively weak CPU cooling with the stock fan layout, and the HS cases beat it by 1 to 2 degrees. More traditional designs like the Lancool 207 and the 216 fly past the HS01 and HS02, setting a ceiling and giving some perspective on cooling. The G400A also accompanies these two. The range for the GPU thermal results was just as tight here, with the inverted HS01 averaging 42.8 degrees above ambient and the HS02 at 43.2, that's within variance, but that's still not even 1 full degree of difference. Our approximate threshold for test variance is greater than that. It's not a surprise that the chimney effect isn't a factor when active airflow is involved, nor is it a surprise that changing the front panel has no impact when there aren't any fans installed at the front of the case. Although the different configurations didn't make much difference, the HS cases performed well overall for GPU thermals, respectively close to the C8 ARGB's 42 degree average. Like the C8, the HS cases have bottom intake fans that force cool air directly into and through the GPU, and with minimal obstruction beyond a dust filter. The Kin95 Pro also has bottom intake fans, but they're less effective, resulting in a 48-degree average. The Flux Pro and Lancool 207 remain leaders here, but one is in a different price class and both are different styles. Full-speed case fans are next, dropping the noise control and testing GPU thermals again. At full speed, we can finally see a difference between at least the regular and inverted HS01 results, with the inverted layout averaging 40 degrees above ambient to the regular layout's 42 degrees above ambient. The bottom intake fans move enough air that flipping them to the top of the case, where they can breathe more freely, is beneficial. The inverted layout also directed slightly more noise towards our mic placement, but not enough for an audible difference at 38.5 versus 38.0 dBA. The regular HS02 result closely matched the HS01 result at 42 degrees, but the HS02 was quieter, as measured from the front, due to its solid panel blocking noise egress. The drop to 35.8 dBA is noticeable, if barely. However, remember that at 27 dBA for the threshold, the performance and noise levels were both equal. As before, the Antec C8 ARGB's GPU cooling is on par with the performance of the HS cases at 41 degrees above ambient, with noise levels equivalent to the HS01. The Kin95 also averaged about 37 dBA, but with worse GPU thermals, averaging 46 degrees. Our standardized set of fans can't be installed in the HS02 due to a lack of 140mm mounts, so that makes this test simple. We installed the two 140mm fans at the front of the HS01 and the single 120mm exhaust in the lower of the two rear slots. With this layout, the average CPU temperature was 41 degrees above ambient and 45 for the P-cores. For this case specifically, those are lower than the stock results, but that's not surprising given the more direct airflow aimed at the CPU cooler. It's also completely normal for performance for a mesh-fronted case in this test. That lands it between the Fractal Mesh Phi 2 Compact and the Fantex P400A Digital. The Antec C8 and Kin95 Pro results on this chart were both tested with side intake, so performance is predictably worse than the HS01. On the other hand, moving to the normal front-to-back layout with the standardized fans hurt GPU thermals. Removing the stock bottom intake fans that made the HS01 competitive in this category led to an average GPU temperature of 45 degrees above ambient, which isn't terrible, but allowed the Kin95 Pro and the C8 ARGB to take the lead at 43 degrees for both. Montech's stock fan layout seems like the best compromise. To finish things off, we'll move back to the noise normalized testing. VRM thermals were nearly identical for each of the three tested configurations from Montech, averaging 33 degrees above ambient in the HS02 Pro, which lands the HS cases in the middle of the chart when sorting by VRM thermals, between the C8 ARGB at 33 degrees and the Kin95 Pro at 31. The SPD hub sensor readings sort differently though, and they tell a similar story for at least these cases. All three configurations averaged close to 25 degrees above ambient, close to the C8 ARGB's 24, although the Kin95 Pro scored well in this specific instance at 21 degrees. All right, Montech's strength has always been in the budget space. These cases are in sort of that mid-range category, 130, 140 bucks, so it's not quite a budget case anymore, but they've been fighting pretty well here too. So, as a fish tank case with a curved corner, so that's this one here, the $140 HS02 Pro is reasonably priced for what it's trying to achieve. At least, it's reasonably priced compared to the more expensive cases that match that description, like the Haven HS420, the Antec C8 Curve, specifically the Curve model, the Height Y60, or even Montech's own Kin95 Pro. We seriously recommend watching the build section of this review, though, if you skipped here, because there were some features we didn't like, there were some we really did like. It's up to you to decide whether the savings are worth it in the places where we didn't like them. If you use a back connect motherboard, it may solve many of the issues that we saw, including with cabling. The HS02's thermal performance wasn't abysmal, but it really wasn't impressive. It was middling. It was fine. Okay at best. And we're more willing to accept middling performance from a case that has a better reason for it, like trying to look cool and being more restricted. So that'd be this one. That'd be the glass-fronted option. The HS01 has greater cooling potential thanks to its mesh front panel, but it's also more generic. There aren't a ton of fish tank cases that can compete with the HS02's price, but there are a whole hell of a lot of mesh-fronted cases that can compete with the HS01, and for cheaper. But whether it's cheaper or around the same price or 10 bucks more expensive, cases like the Lian Li Lancool 207, the Fractal North, the Fantex G400A, and several of the others we've reviewed over the past couple years are all viable alternatives to a mesh-fronted case. Now, each of those that we just named, we like them for various reasons, we dislike them for other reasons, so you'll have to choose based on the system you want to build and what you think looks cool. That matters a lot for cases too. But the point is that there's a lot of competition in that price class. If you love the case, or something, you really like how it looks, whatever it may be, it's fine. We just think the fish tank version of this, because the cooling is so similar between them and is not impressive in either, we think it makes a little more sense for most people. And if you really want mesh, then there are better mesh cases. So that's going to be it for this one. Thanks for watching. As always, subscribe for more fun to be doing case reviews. Again, let us know what you want us to look at next. We have actually the Corsair new 4000 series case lined up to finally review that one, so that'll be on the channel soon. Otherwise, subscribe for more. Go to store.gamersnexus.net to support us directly, like by buying one of our PC building mod mats or our project and soldering mats made of a high heat resistant silicone, or you can get our t-shirts or other items on the store. Directly funds our testing and in-depth reviews. And thanks for watching. We'll see you all next time.